all looking good on your end, Claire?
Yes.
Brilliant. And yes, for the questions, if you just type them in the Q&A box or the chat box, we'll just answer them as we go along. That's my preferred style. And yeah, let's get started. So JP Morgan Healthcare Week, this is typically the second week of January, and it is the biggest partnering week of the year for the life sciences industry. Now, Claire, you've attended JPM in person several times before, about 30,000 people. Does that sound right? Is that an underestimate, maybe?
Yeah, I would agree with that number just as on a general sense. As you guys know, because of the pandemic, people have varied forecasts on how the exact turnout will be. There has been some talks about JP Morgan being a bit of a smaller conference than before, with less presenting companies than they had in the past. But even if that were the case, we still have been noticing significant traction for JP Morgan Healthcare Week and just the series of events that are going to be taking place during the course of that week.
Absolutely. John, you asked a quick question. Will we be sharing the presentation? Yes, the recording and slides, they will be shared with everyone after the session. And so, because JP Morgan Healthcare Week is such a big partnering opportunity, as a fundraising executive, this can potentially be the most important week of the year for you. 2023, I think we're all looking forward to getting done with 2022. So it should be an excellent opportunity to meet with capital investors, licensing partners, industry professionals, anyone who can really help fuel the growth of your company. And if you're going to be taking advantage of this week, there's a few different things that you can utilize to make sure that you have a higher chance of success. So you're going to be attending partnering conferences, but it's important if you're looking for investors, for example, or licensing partners, that they're vetted by a company that has an investor research team. That's something that we do here at Life Science Nation. That's the team that Claire is part of. I know several of you in the audience are already registered, so I'm very much looking forward to meeting you in person or reconnecting in person next month. Having memorable business cards is also something that can be really useful when you're connecting. If you imagine just the sheer number of people that any potential partners are going to be meeting throughout the course of the week, having a really strong and memorable business card can be something that will help you potentially make a better impression. But moving on to impressions, having an amazing and compelling story for your company's unique technology assets, why it is you decided to start the company, how are you addressing these unmet medical needs in a unique way, and then linking that compelling story to a professional set of marketing collateral, non-confidential materials marketing collateral. We use the terms relatively synonymously, but linking these two things together and having an amazing set of materials to, bring to, JP Morgan Week is going to be definitely a really valuable tool that you can utilize to increase your chances of success during that week of partnering. So we are actually also Life Science Nation. We're going to be in Union Square in San Francisco during JPM week for our Resi San Francisco conference. We're going to be in person on the 10th of January at the Marines Memorial Hotel. During this day, there'll be one-on-one partnering meetings, investor panels, education workshops, the Innovators Pitch Challenge, which Claire has been leading this year, and we also have a really amazing networking reception in the evening. We're forecasting over about 500 investors and licensing partners to be registered for the conference, so really should be an amazing event. And the 2 days of virtual partnering are on the 11th and the 12th. So so if you're interested in attending and you haven't already registered, I know several of you in the audience have. Do send us an email. There are hybrid options, which give you access to the on-site event and virtual partnering. And there are also virtual only registrations in case you cannot attend in person. So I'm going to hand you over to Claire now for a little bit.
Before we get to this slide, I just wanted to quickly comment on JPM and the logistics in general, just for anyone who's not familiar with the week. I know many people here have been to many JPM weeks, but as Alex mentioned, so our Resi San Francisco conference is going to be on Tuesday, January 10th. So that is definitely one of the busiest days of that week. I would say most of the events, conferences, and all of the networking events, most of them will take place, I would say Tuesday and Wednesday are the biggest days. And then there are some events that go on Thursday as well, but it does die out after Wednesday from my previous experience. So for anyone who's still contemplating whether they should go to San Francisco or not and how they should plan out their schedule, I just thought that would be a useful comment to just share for those who aren't familiar.
I'm definitely not, so it's great to hear that.
Yeah, and then another comment is that around later this month, you will be able to see some companies who put out their own version of networking events and conferences that take place during that week. So for those of you who are, for example, active on LinkedIn, just be cognizant of that and make sure that you know what's going on each day so you can plan accordingly. Yep. So I'll move on to the next slide. So to talk a little bit about the changing investor landscape. So especially people who are kind of beginning out with their entrepreneur career, they have a pretty limited knowledge of what kind of investors are out there. So many people probably would have heard or are familiar with venture capital funds. But at LSN, we actually do have ongoing dialogues and have active communications with 10 different categories of investors. So even within venture capital, it's a pretty broad category when you think about it. So there are a lot of, for example, micro or smaller VCs with very smaller funds that invest in seed to early Series A companies, and then there are a lot of big name VCs as well that can invest all the way from seed to late growth stage and beyond. So beyond venture capital, we also deal with a lot of angel investors who might invest later than you think, family offices, endowments, and foundations. And of course, large corporates that might have their own venture or innovation arm, as well as the corporates, whether that's big pharma or medtech companies that strategically invest or partner with companies in a lot of different ways, which could include licensing, M&A, co-development, and so on. So just make sure that when you're dealing with a lot of investors, especially preparing for an event like JPM, where there will be so many different types of investors and partners out there, be aware of what kinds of investments or partnership models they have, and try to identify who are the best partners you want to engage with. So this is a sample of investors who frequently attend our Resi conference events. So as Alex mentioned, we are actually expecting over 500 unique investors to join us. That is actually very consistent with the number of investors we've seen in the past. I'm pretty sure there are some people in the audience today who have been to Resi San Francisco in the past. Our last in-person event was in 2020 before the pandemic. We have been seeing, again, a ton of traction from investors and strategic partners who are planning a trek to San Francisco, even those from outside of the US. So we are expecting a good amount of investors. And you can see in this logo splash here, maybe some names stick out, but it does include venture capital, large pharma, medtech, corporate venture capital, family offices, and angel groups. These are all the categories of investors that I mentioned in the previous slide.
Yeah, no, it'll be a really amazing congregation of different groups. So, moving on to sort of, why it is so important to be able to tell this story, and then also how that story is intricately linked to all of the non-confidential marketing materials that you'll be bringing to JPM Week and beyond. When you are moving into the business development domain, and I know there are several of you in the audience who are serial entrepreneurs, you've done this before, you know what you're doing. I know there's also a few earlier stage and first-time CEOs. But being able to really highlight your unique company story and tell it consistently through a set of marketing materials can be a super important factor when potentially differentiating what you're doing from another company, but also whether or not you make a lasting impression on any potential partners that you might meet. And at LSN, we've developed this process, which is relatively unique in that it starts from the smallest amount of information possible all the way through to a full slide deck. So for example, starting with your tagline, that's really your sort of company identity distilled into 5 to 7 words roughly. You know, can you do that? And then can you logically extend your tagline all the way through to an elevator pitch? You know, having a really strong tagline, something that stands out and says exactly what it is you're doing, having a convincing elevator pitch that you can deliver in 1 minute potentially, you know, that is something where if you don't necessarily have a 30-minute meeting scheduled with an investor and you're just bumping into someone, you know, this could be something that could really make them want to know more about what you're doing. If you're a therapeutics company and you can imagine that the investors and the partners, they're potentially going to be meeting with dozens of therapeutic startups all throughout the course of the week, you know, do you have a really strong tagline that would be something that they would remember? You know, moving on with this, having an executive summary really, you know, can be, you know, roughly about 2 pages long, but going into a lot more depth on your story, your company history, your management team, why it is you are addressing this unmet medical need, developing a 1-page document that you can use, which really contains all of this sort of summarized bullet point information that someone can quickly digest in about 5 minutes. Claire, with regards to the 1-pager, and everyone, this is something we refer to commonly as the tear sheet. We can send you all a template for the tear sheet just so that you can have a go filling it in yourselves. But Claire, you've been speaking with investors for a while, and don't we get a lot of positive feedback normally on the tear sheet as one of the marketing materials a company can present or have ready?
Yes, correct. So we will get more into that as we go through the different components of what we consider a solid marketing collateral. But the format that we have shared with a lot of entrepreneurs in the past has received a lot of positive feedback, and it really helps net down the information in literally just 1 page. So it's a clear, cogent way to communicate your company's value proposition to investors.
Absolutely. We just had a question from the audience about the areas, the domains or sectors that are covered by the Resi conferences. So the Resi conferences are cross-domain. It is therapeutics, drugs, medical devices, med tech, diagnostics, digital health, and then R&D services play an important tool or play an important part as well. Those could be particular research tools. They could be anything that's used to, you know, help bolster R&D in other companies. Those are all of the different sectors that are covered by the Resi conferences and the partners who attend. And then so finally, after you've got your executive summary, you've got your 1-pager, you can also get your pitch deck, but I'm not going to talk too much about it because I know Claire's going to move on to that later. And one of the really important things about having a pitch deck, a 1-pager, an executive summary, is because all of the potential investors and licensing partners that you'll be speaking to, all of them are different. If you were to get 100 investors in a room and say to them, right, an early stage company is approaching you, who would you, well, you know, what materials would you like to read? Guaranteed, a portion of them would say we'd prefer to review the pitch deck, a portion of them would prefer to review the executive summary, and a portion would prefer to review the 1-pager. Sometimes they'll like to review more than one material. Sometimes it's only one. But when you really get your story straight and when you're telling it consistently throughout all of these materials, then it should make it very easy for you to get a meeting with a potential partner, because it doesn't matter which particular material they choose to review. The story is there. The same unique value points are still covered. It's just simply a different modality because everyone's different. Personally, I always prefer to review a pitch deck rather than an executive summary or a 1-pager. Claire, do you have a particular preference on what you like to review?
I guess I would say I personally prefer reviewing a slide deck. I feel like, that's really the central core marketing piece among all of the collateral. Of course, all of them kind of combine to bring everything together, but definitely the slide deck, I would say.
Absolutely. And we just got a question from the audience. What material should be considered non-confidential? Any guidance on that is appreciated. It's a good question. Claire, do you want to have some input on that? I can also give.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's standards of what should be considered confidential and versus non-confidential is probably different among even the people in the audience and depending on what they're working on. I would say, some of the central areas to think about is what are you comfortable with sharing with the investor when you're thinking about meeting them in an introductory setting? Because one of the things that you should consider is I know there are some people who want to share everything about their company and they get really excited about sharing their exciting story, their developments, their data, and so on. But when you're getting into an introductory meeting, when you're meeting someone for the first time, you want to be careful about sharing too much about your company because for example, I would think that most investors wouldn't do this, but there might be, for example, an investor who's working with a portfolio company that's doing something similar with what you're doing, and they might use that data or try to leverage it or like even steal. Those things actually do happen in reality. So think about how you want to share about your company, but you don't want to get into an introductory meeting with the most critical data that your company has accumulated this far. So I guess that's, I think, the main consideration I would have when thinking about confidentiality.
Yeah, if you're a therapeutics company, for example, it would be important when approaching a potential partner to tell them that you might have a small molecule for oncology. That's a very general, broad example, but you don't need to necessarily say the exact details of the configuration of the small molecule or all the ways in which it works and its, absolutely most defined mechanism of action. That's not something that would necessarily be relevant for the introductory meeting. This is something that you've got a lot of time to work on, and also that we can help with that. We're more than happy to give some advice and give some guidance on that particular front. And one of the interesting things is when you are able to really net out your company value and net out your story from as simple as 5 to 7 words, as simple as 5 to 7 sentences, but then, increase that all the way through to a pitch deck, it makes it much easier for you to be able to simply describe what it is you are doing and what your unique value points are. And this is very important when it comes to the context of a deal, because you need to be multilingual. And this does not mean you need to be able to speak French and Spanish. It means you need to be able to speak different languages in the context of the deal. So for example, when you go to a partnering conference like Resi, it's very likely that many of the people who you will meet might be gatekeepers. They'll know what the firm is looking for, but they won't necessarily be an expert in whatever it is you're doing, the end product. They might be vetting the opportunities for the particular firm. And if you go into that meeting and you start using heavily detailed advanced scientific language on what you're doing, it might potentially dissuade them from pursuing that conversation further because you've not communicated the value of what you are doing effectively. Now, you may very well, in your introductory meeting, meet a navigator. You might meet an evaluator, people who actually understand more specifically the configuration of the technology. They might have a PhD. They might be very knowledgeable of the sector. But if you start with a simple description of what you're doing that's easy to understand and nets out the value points, but someone wants to know more because they have that background, you can always then go and get more advanced, more scientific. But it's a good place to start at the more general language. And then as you work your way down a deal, as you get your secondary and further follow-up meetings, as you begin to go into due diligence, you'll be able to then speak different languages and basically get more detailed in the science until you get to the point where you are talking to the decision maker within the firm. And this is usually someone who speaks a very heavily business-centric language. This is not an exact format for how all of your introductory meetings will go. There will definitely be the case where you might be meeting different players at different stages, but being able to net out your value so that you can simply describe what it is you're doing to immediately hook someone's attention can be a very valuable tool. We have a couple of questions. Eric will answer your question at the end. And then can you ask the investor who they are? Claire, so could you ask the investor, are they a gatekeeper? Are they a decision maker, for example, in a meeting?
I would say, I mean, to answer simply, yes. But I would also, one thing, though I said that, is that with that being said, ideally what you want to do is, for the most of the investors that you meet, I guess the exceptions would be some low-key investors whom like the public information is not readily available. You can read on like the firm's team page, or you can look at their LinkedIn and get a general sense of what their background has been in. What even that general kind of initial scan, you can get a sense of how scientifically educated or trained they are, or how much experience they have in the venture capital industry in general. But definitely when you're in a meeting with, say, there's a team, like the total team members is like 10 people, but you're only meeting with one person, then you can definitely, don't be afraid to ask a question about like how this person will carry on with the rest of the investment process, because that person might be an associate level where the opportunity will be carried on to a more senior person who's more actively involved with the decision making, or that person might be directly involved with the decision making process. But in any case, if you have any questions about how the process will go with the evaluating the investment opportunity, definitely ask that, and I think they will appreciate that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. So, moving now into the actual, the very first material that you need to get prepared. So your tagline, your company identity, really distilled into a single line. And actually here we have examples of vague, generalized, and compelling taglines. If you look at the vague ones, and again, picture yourself as an investor who's attending San Francisco. He's going to JPM week, and he is potentially meeting, or they're potentially meeting, dozens of investors, of companies, sorry. Innovate, design, and optimized. Creating the future of oncology. These are very vague taglines. They don't really tell you anything about what the company is doing. That does not stand out in any particular way. When you move on to the generalized taglines, such as taking the pain out of bladder cancer or next generation protein therapeutics, you're getting a little bit closer. With the first one, you know that what you are doing is you are addressing bladder cancer. Whether or not it's a device or a drug, you don't know just yet, but you're getting a little bit closer. Same with the middle one, next generation protein therapeutics. Again, you know it's a therapeutic, and you know that it's a protein-based therapeutic, but do you know what indication it is? It could be anything. It could be dermatology, could be diseases of the nervous system. So when you get down to the more compelling taglines, and these are ones which are really net out what the company is doing. Novel multimodal therapeutics for prevention of chronic pain. Immediately, if there is any particular partners who are interested in therapeutics companies, and they are interested in companies addressing chronic conditions, they immediately know this is a company who I should be speaking to. Or if they know someone who's interested in that area, they can immediately make that referral. You should be speaking to this particular company. Scaling production of microbial medicines with synthetic biology. Really specific. It's really summarizing this unique value proposition, and it really can help make you stand out compared to many other companies. We have some examples here, some further ones. the top one, this was actually a company we've been working with for a while, and the initial tagline was innovations in skin healing. But that doesn't really tell you too much about what they're doing. And eventually we helped them, develop the tagline of novel therapeutic peptides for pediatric atopic dermatitis. I mean, really, that is a strong tagline. And if you are a therapeutics investor, you'll immediately know just by reading that whether or not they are someone you should be speaking to, whether or not they're relevant to what your particular focus is. The bottom one, revolutionizing digital health therapies or behavioral digital therapeutics for treating, preventing, or managing chronic disease. Again, an amazingly strong tagline. It really nets out what you're doing, and it can really help, leave a long-lasting positive impression, because that is a compelling tagline. Moving on from the tagline, moving on to the elevator pitch, which is one step up, roughly 5 to 7 sentences, something that you would be delivering in roughly a minute or so. We have one here from a company called Reglogene. You can see here that just by looking at the first sentence, they're preclinical, that they are developing a therapy for glioblastoma. If you then move on through the elevator pitch, you can see that they've got a drug development engine. They're working with many particular different players, a global CRO, academic partners. Again, this is kind of leading into sort of who they are and what they've been able to accomplish. And then if you look at the final sentence of the first paragraph, again, providing more context, more detail on what they're doing, speaking a little bit more about this particular condition, the glioblastoma, that they're looking to target, how their particular drug is going to work, and providing further validation as to why this is an important indication to be solving. And then just a little bit of information at the end to sort of ground the potential partner in just what they're doing, what some milestones they're hoping to achieve over the next few months or next year might be, what they're looking for. Claire, do you have anything else to add to this?
Well, the only comment that I think I would make here is that even though it's relatively short, and if you read it through, it will definitely take you less than a minute, it does cover all of the key essentials, including what just Alex described, the mechanism of action, just how their therapeutic works, as well as the capabilities they have in terms of R&D. So they lay out the strategic partnerships that they have engaged thus far. They also talk about the financial ask. So it's definitely something that sounds easy, but it's easier said than done. When we look at elevator pitches that a lot of companies do or speak when, for example, they're pitching at a Resi conference, for example, they actually miss some of the key essentials that we would consider that should be put in an elevator pitch. So this is definitely an example of a solid, good elevator pitch.
Yeah, and there's no one particular way that an elevator pitch can be done. For example, here, there's no mention of the CEO's name. There's no personal connection. I know I've worked with companies before where the CEOs have been medical professionals in the industry for 20 years, and they have a personal connection to why they started the company. I mean, that's a really strong thing that you can put in your elevator pitch. So there's no one particular format, but if you can really net out all of these important value points in about 5 to 7 sentences, and imagine yourself in a scenario, if you were to bump into a potential partner and you've really only got about a minute to describe what it is you're doing or to potentially sell them, then this is, something to be aware of, something to be thinking of, and really quite a good thing to have in your arsenal when you're attending JPM week.
Yeah.
I want.
would just
Sorry, yeah.
Oh,
Go
sorry,
ahead. No, go
Alex.
ahead.
I just wanted to comment that, the name elevator pitch comes from literally being able to pitch to someone in the elevator, right? Well, at JPM, and if you've been to JPM, you've probably seen this before as well, but I have actually seen many people actually, when I'm in elevators of different venues, just people trying to, describe what they're doing, and also a bunch of networking events that you'll float around. This is something that you really want to prepare if you don't have it prepared already, because you never know when you'll be able to use it, especially with JPM coming up so quickly.
Yes, that's actually funny you mentioned that. After the bio conference that we went to in June, I was on a flight home from San Diego to Chicago, and I actually bumped into an early stage company from California on the plane. I bumped into them as we were heading off, as we were getting our bags from the overhead lockers. And I had about 30 seconds to kind of talk about what we were doing. I managed to get a business card, managed to then grow that relationship just from that very small interaction. So having an elevator pitch in your arsenal can be really, really helpful. There's just a couple of examples here. These two companies are not real, but they're the descriptions of the elevator pitches. They're based off loosely off ones that we've heard before. The first one is an example of an elevator pitch that is far too technically detailed. Again, if you're trying to get introductory meetings, you don't really need to get too advanced, too scientific. It can potentially just sort of alienate the person who you're speaking to if they don't have that particular background. And then for the bottom one, it's just a very general, it's a very broad, and it's very non-descriptive elevator pitch. It's almost a little bit too grandiose. There's no specific mention of kind of it, what it is you're doing. You know that, for example, this company is using deep learning and AI to help diagnose patients better, cancer patients, but there's no indication on how that actually is being used. There's no indication of what cancers it is they're looking to target. So these are just a couple of examples, loosely based off ones that we've heard before, where they do need a little bit of work. The top one needs to be made a little bit more simple. And then the bottom one, it just needs a bit more context, a bit more about the company and what they're doing, as it's just a little bit too vague. And also another thing, and I think this ties into some of the other materials that I'm now going to hand you over to Claire for, but try to avoid unnecessary terms when you're an early stage company speaking to potential partners. In the bottom elevator pitch, there's the statement that they've developed a groundbreaking diagnostic test, but actually the company who we were speaking to when this happened was raising a seed round. The test very well may be groundbreaking in the future. What you're doing very well may be a game changer in the market, but if you're at your earliest stages, it's always better to be a little bit more humble about what it is you're doing and not make these grandiose cliche statements, because it can potentially dissuade someone from wanting to continue to pursue a conversation with you. And I've seen it happen before. So just as a word of advice, I'm now going to hand you over to Claire for the executive summary.
Yep, thank you, Alex. So I'll be going over the rest of the marketing collateral, including the executive summary, the pair sheet / one pager, and the slide deck. So we talked about some of the more simpler, I guess, fundamental marketing collateral in terms of like the simple sense, but the executive summary and the slide deck, which we'll get into combined, I would say a good majority of investors will be looking at both, or at least one of them. And the executive summary we recommend is a 1 to 2 page extension of the tagline and elevator pitch. So as Alex mentioned when he was talking about the elevator pitch, while it does contain the key essentials, it doesn't necessarily convey everything about the company. So this will depend on what you want to highlight as when it comes to the strengths of your company and the value proposition that you provide. But the executive summary is kind of like the first extension of everything that you want to add that you weren't able to put in the tagline or elevator pitch. So this might be information about your management team if you didn't really cover much about the financial ask, or for example, maybe your patent portfolio. This is an opportunity to be able to net those details out. So it should be a highlight of the key data and information you have. But then going back to when we were answering that question earlier, it shouldn't contain any of the data or information that you're uncomfortable sharing with an investor in the initial meeting. So this is an example of a company that we worked with in the past. The font is a little bit small, so you can't really see the text word by word, but it talks about the opportunity overview that the company provides, explaining about how their technology works. Also, it covers information about the key management team, and it's all netted down into 1 to 2 slides, without being, necessarily too text heavy. So that's something that we could highly suggest as a good format for the executive summary.
So Claire, we actually got a question about on what font size should be used.
That's a great question. Well, Alex, what do you think?
Honestly, when I'm reading an executive summary, I like having graphics in the executive summary because sometimes that can really help sort of break up just the complete monotony of text. I think in terms of font size, try not to do anything smaller than 12. Maybe play around with 13, 12 or 13 just to see what works. I think what's important to consider is, what graphics can you put in, which can really help, add value to the executive summary, and what are all the key elements that you want to contain? Do you want to go and talk about your personal connection to the problem and why you decided to form the company? Do you really want to emphasize your management team? Do you want to talk maybe more about the unmet medical need, or as you mentioned, Claire, the patent portfolio? Get down all of the information that you really think you want to put in, and then you can begin to sort of adjust the information. You can summarize it, you can narrow it down, and it's not something that can be done overnight. It takes a long time and a lot of hard work to get these together. But maybe start with font size 12 or 13, think about the elements you want to include, and then go from there, is what I would say.
Yeah, and then there's another question. It's kind of an extension to the previous question on what font is preferred. I don't think I've actually heard from an investor about like what font they prefer. But when we see a lot of executive summaries, I think some of the popular ones that are used are also those that are used in other documents. So for example, people might opt for like Arial, Calibri. Some people also use Times New Roman. Me personally, I wouldn't use anything that um, I wouldn't use Comic Sans, for example. But I'm sure everyone has a little bit of a different preference because even the font styles that I mentioned that are typically used, um, people have preferences on using different ones from like the main three that I mentioned. But Alex, do you have any comments to that?
No, the three you mentioned are the ones I wouldn't veer away from either of their ones. Times New Roman, Arial, or Calibri, however you pronounce it. If you stick with one of those three, that's a very safe bet. I wouldn't venture beyond.
Yeah, I think the most important thing, of course, is not necessarily about like the font size or what font you use, but we've seen executive summaries or other marketing collateral where people like to play around a little bit too much with tacky graphics or using too much color. So I think those are the things that you really want to avoid because I think, the intentions were to make some of the graphics or some information stand out. But if you don't use them in the appropriate way, they can actually take away from the message.
Yeah, and just as a finishing point on that, everyone, we are here to help. If any of you have an executive summary or a one page or a pitch deck, which we're about to get onto, and you would like some feedback, feel free to contact us. If you're a West Coast company, you can contact me directly. But if you don't know exactly who to contact at LSN, just email Resi, RESI, at lifesciencenation.com. And we can help you and we can help out. We can give you some feedback. We can provide some guidance. We've worked with hundreds of companies and quite a few different materials. So more than happy to really give you some feedback on that. All right.
Yep. So this is the tear sheet / one pager that we mentioned earlier. So you could see that so again, the font is very small, but to lay out how this would work. So it really is literally a one pager where you can add essential information about your company. So it's really something like when you think about it, you're meeting an investor, you want to share information about your company, and you can just tear it out from your notebook or whatever you have. And when even though a lot of these material exchanges are done virtually through the means of email or LinkedIn and so on, you will be meeting a lot of investors slash strategic partners in person at a conference like Resi or a networking event. So you want to make sure to have something like this in hand. So having ample copies of something like a one pager is a great idea. We have, of course, seen companies who use the executive summary and one pager kind of interchangeably. This really depends on how much information you want to include about your company. You might think a one pager is enough to serve also as an executive summary, but that might not be enough for everyone. But if you look at the how the general format works here, in the left column, you can add some simple information about your company, including what industry you're in, the key management or the key opinion leaders slash advisory board that you're working with who are actively involved with the company, the intellectual property status that your company is in, as well as your financing ask. So how much you're looking to fundraise and how those funds will be used. And then in the right pane, which is kind of larger for perhaps obvious reasons, this is where you can share general information about your company, which would be something similar to an elevator pitch. For example, if you're a therapeutics company, this is a good place to put your pipeline or information and the different assets that you have under development. And then also talk about the key data and technical milestones you've accomplished. So again, we found that this format has been really effective for a lot of people to be able to help organize their key information. So we will be sharing this format to everyone who is in the audience. So yeah, but any comments on the tear sheet, Alex?
Just that the template we'll be giving you will be similar to the one on the left, which doesn't have any graphics. I think graphics can, just like the executive summary, really be a nice addition to the tear sheet. So do not be afraid to put in any graphics like the example on the right. I think that when the correct graphics are used appropriately, I think it looks amazing in a material. That was all.
Okay, so we'll get into the slide deck. I see that we have a new question, but I think it's better to, I think for this question, yeah, we can get to it at the end of the presentation. We're almost there. So the slide deck is perhaps the most important central part of all of your marketing collateral. So I don't think I've actually seen an investor who says we're not going to look at your slide deck. I think everyone will want to look at your slide deck. So what we consider a good slide deck in terms of length is anything that's between like 10 to 12 slides. So again, I want to emphasize the fact that this is for an introductory meeting. So the 10 to 12 slides isn't necessarily going to convey everything about your company. It's not going to include every single data or every single milestones you've accomplished since inception. So just wanted to make sure that that's firmly in place. And the table here that you see in this slide, this is a list of the key components that you should be addressing in your slide deck. With that said, everyone's going to have a different way of sharing their story and how they want to approach it. So this is not necessarily the correct order that you need to go by, but I'm just going over some of the essentials here. So I'm sure with most slide decks, it will start with a cover, including a logo, tagline, and the contact information of whoever is presenting this material. And then it will get into the overview of the company, starting with the elevator pitch, the current status you're in. And then after that is where you want to highlight the value proposition. So in a sense, you're actually trying to educate the person that you're talking to about why your opportunity is important. So they might already be familiar with the market, but you're the one who needs to show that you're the person that understands this market and what you're doing the best. So this is where you can talk about your unmet medical need, the commercial opportunities that your company is providing, and then share if there are any interesting stories about how you started this company, what's the origin of technology, and that's also something that you want to include in your slide deck as well. Alex kind of pointed to this earlier. So saying buzzwords like groundbreaking, transformative, of course, it could be that your technology is indeed transformative or groundbreaking, but if you are going to say something like that, then there should be ample information about how your opportunity stands out among competitors who are working on something similar. So even if they're not a direct competitor, if they're in the same market, you want to again show that you're an expert in the market and the technology that you're working on. So it's always good to have a slide where you talk about the key competitors. That includes companies that might already be providing the current standard of care, but also companies who are in a similar stage of development. Also, of course, you want to strengthen your value proposition by talking about your technology and how it has been validated thus far, and you want to include the key supporting data that supports that information. Of course, talking about your key product pipeline and your current financing needs. Also talking about your management team and scientific advisory board, if applicable. One thing that I want to comment on regarding the advisory board is, so I've actually seen companies where they kind of fib or exaggerate a little bit about their advisory board. So they might have like a technical or scientific expert that they include in the advisory board, but when you look deep into it, so when the investor inquires about it, it might be that the person is actually not really involved with the company and they just added it for the value that the name provides. So just make sure to be very transparent about the key management team and any of the relevant experience they have that helps the investor or strategic partner who is listening about your company kind of think about de-risking the opportunity, and be transparent about the scientific advisory board / key opinion leaders that you are working with. And then, so that should make up the core 10 to 12 slides. And then what we suggest is, if you're especially going into an in-person meeting, it is useful to have kind of these appendix slides where if an investor does indeed ask some specific questions about the data or just anything that you didn't really cover in the introductory components, then that's where you can pull out your appendix slides and then hopefully answer the questions that the investor has. Anything to add here, Alex?
No, I think that was excellent, Claire. I think, everyone there's no one particular way or one particular format when it comes to the presentation and the slide deck. So as long as it reads and flows like a logical story, it's not just a collection of different important items kind of fit together in some random order, then I think you'll be brilliant. I've actually seen many slide decks which put the management team and scientific advisory board first, because that's something very strong that they immediately want to highlight to anyone just kind of coming into the deck. And we can provide feedback on anything, on any decks that you've created, but yeah, no one particular format. We did get a few questions in, but I'm going to answer them, Claire, after this next slide of yours.
Yeah, sure. Since we're running out of time, I'll just quickly go over this one. So this is an example of something that could be useful for your slide deck if you don't have something like this already. So one of the things that companies might often overlook is talking about their financial ask. Sometimes they might be very broad or vague about how much they're going to be raising and what the use of funds will be. It is important to show that you really thought that through and why you need X amount of money for what. So having something like this Gantt chart that you see in the bottom is actually a very compelling visual, because even just having this one slide says a lot of things about your company, just how you're going to progress through the timeline of the next couple of years, what milestones are you hoping to accomplish during these consecutive years. So, and then at the same time, it's important to have a clear and realistic development timeline. So you want to be realistic with the amount of money that you're raising. You are going to be accomplishing these milestones. And this is something that you don't have to worry about getting this absolutely right. This is something that, for example, you might improve or edit based on the feedback that you get from investors and strategic partners as you have these introductory meetings. But just at least make sure that you have thought this through and be able to communicate to investors in a logical way.
Yeah. All right, absolutely. So let's just that's all actually let's answer. Let me just tell you about Dennis's book, everyone, and then we'll answer the questions. So a lot of the information presented in the presentation today and just in general, there's a lot more, there's a complete wealth of information in a book that our founder and CEO wrote, Dennis Ford, and it's called The Life Science Executives Fundraising Manifesto. All of the attendees of the workshop will actually receive a free copy of this book, and it contains a lot more information on several different important aspects of fundraising as a life science executive. So do give it a read. When I first came into the company, I did not know very much information about all of the different investor types. So it was very interesting for me to be able to read up on them and really differentiate between a family office and a foundation, a corporate VC and a VC. It will be provided to everyone. So we have a few questions about, which have been asked kind of, and they're kind of getting more into Resi and the upcoming meeting. First of all, we had a question about, does the chart include historical data? Claire, that was an answer to your Gantt when you were describing the Gantt chart. One of the things about having either a Gantt chart or a development timeline, if you can show what you've done in the past couple of years and or what you're going to do, what your milestones are over the next couple of years, and if you can break it down either into quarters or just by years so that any particular potential investor or a partner has an idea of what you've done and what you're going to do, it can be something that's very useful. For example, if you're raising a Series A round and you used your seed money to hit certain key milestones, you would definitely want to highlight that in the development timeline in the Gantt chart, because it shows that you raised money, you hit milestones, and you're looking to raise again. Anything to add, Claire?
No, I think that covered it. I mean, in the interest of time, it might be good to move on with the rest of the questions, so I won't add too much, but I think you covered it well, Alex.
Of course. All right. We had another question. Would you include the Gantt chart, the timeline in your introductory pitch deck? Absolutely. Development timeline,
yes.
super. Always one of the best visual aids for any potential partner on what you've done, where you're going. Really, stellar stuff. Someone asked about, what the pitch duration would be, whether it's 3 minutes, 5 minutes, or 10 minutes. It honestly depends on what the opportunity is. I mean, if you're pitching in the Innovators Pitch Challenge, which is the pitch competition we host at Resi, it's a 4-minute timed pitch. If you're having a 30-minute meeting with a potential partner, then it depends how the conversation goes. You might have a minute at the start to do your pitch. We normally recommend that when you're having a meeting with someone, it's more of a conversation with them. They're asking you questions, you're asking them questions, you're pitching what you're doing. That could be a minute long, it could be slightly longer. I don't think there's one particular set defined time. But if you are participating in the IPC, for example, at Resi, it is a 4-minute timed pitch, and that might vary at other conferences. Once you really net out your key company value points all the way from the tagline to the elevator pitch through to the pitch deck, should be much easier for you to do a 4-minute pitch, a 5-minute pitch, a 10-minute pitch. This will come a lot more naturally. Someone asked if there were, sorry.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to say, like, typically, in a meeting like Resi or any other partnering conference, the meetings are typically about 30 minutes. So it's kind of like a bit of a speed dating, if you will. But you just be careful that you don't take up all the 30 minutes just talking about your company. So you do want to ideally give like 10 to 15 minutes of room for investors to ask questions, and not just investors, but for you to ask questions to investors or strategic partners at your meeting as well.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, if someone decides to pursue a potential investment opportunity with you, it's going to be a two-way relationship. And you want to make sure that you show to them that you're open to that. Ask them questions, let them ask you questions. It is a relationship that can potentially last 10 to 15 years. We just got a question in about when does the partnering open for our Resi conference in San Francisco? It opens on December the 19th, everyone. If you've not already registered and you're interested in registering, you can go to our resiconference.com website, and there's a registration page there. In 2 weeks, yesterday is when the partnering platform opens. It's definitely worth registering as soon as you can, especially if you're attending in person, because you need to get hotels and flights booked. But if you can be in the partnering platform for when it opens, it gives you a lot more time to build up a company profile, send meeting requests, do appropriate follow-up, conduct appropriate research. The more time you have and the more prepared you are, the better your outcomes will be. Part of this question was any tips for like this sort of intro email or message. We do actually have a example template of a message that you can attach to a meeting request at Resi, and it has worked with quite a lot of success before. If you are interested in receiving that, just email us. If you're on the West Coast, you can email me directly. If not, email resi@lifesciencenation.com, and we can help you out there. In terms of deadlines for registering for Resi, there are no deadlines, but the earlier you get registered, the much better it is. You have more time to prepare, more time to book meetings. We did get a question about the process of setting up meetings, but I am aware that we are reaching the hour mark. I actually have a meeting later today or tomorrow with this particular gentleman, so I might answer that question in our meeting. Just so that we don't take up any more time, because we have reached the hour mark. But just as a finishing point, everyone, you know, at Life Science Nation, we have the Resi conferences that we host 5 times a year. We have 2 databases, and the investor database is commonly used by fundraising executives looking to really get a global target list of potential investors and partners who might be a right fit for them. We do demos for free just to see how many people might be on your list. So if that's something you're interested in, do send us an email, and we'd be happy to set up a call with you. And then we also have an education component here at LSN. And what we've done today, the workshop, is part of that education component. And we have several other webinars leading up to Resi JPM, including partnering tutorials, so that we can help everyone to get appropriately prepared, not only for Resi, but for the week in general, because we want all of you to be having a really successful week to start off 2023. So I will end the presentation there. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending, for listening in, for asking questions. If you do have any more questions, please do email them to us. If I've not answered the question in the way you wanted me to, send me an email directly. I'm going to be around for the rest of today, so I'm more than happy to answer that. And everyone, you will be receiving the slides, a copy of Dennis's book, and the tear sheet template as a follow-up to this. If you would like something else, for example, the message template for your meeting requests at Resi, send us an email, and we'd be happy to sort you out there. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and thank you all very much for attending today. I look forward to hopefully seeing as many.
Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, hopefully I'll get to see as many of you as possible next month in person at Resi in San Francisco. And have a wonderful holidays, everyone, if we don't speak before then. Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone. Feel free to add us on LinkedIn as well. We're active, so
Yeah.
thanks
Okay.
again.
Take care, everyone. Have a great day.